Hi everyone, welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to talk about Johnny Gentle and the Silver Beetles. Now when I took my trip to Scotland recently, link up here, I had hoped to visit the locations in Scotland for the tours during May. But as always I ran out of time because I tried to fit in too much in the little time I had. So the next best thing then, a video from home. Johnny Gentle and the Silver Beetles. Now you're going to hear me pronounce or maybe mispronounce the band names as I'm going through, but I'll probably do it for effect. So comment below if you think I'm saying it wrong. So here's a quick name rundown before we start. They started as the Quarrymen. They had Johnny and the Moondogs, the Beatles with two E's, the Beatles with an A, probably pronounced the same way as the Beatles, the Silver Beats, the Johnny Gentle Band, the Silver Beetles, and of course finally the Beatles. It's November 1956 and a 16-year-old John Lennon forms the Skiffle Group with several of his friends from the Quarrybank High School in Liverpool. And they briefly called themselves the Blackjacks before changing their name to the Quarrymen because they discovered that another band had already used the name Blackjacks. 15-year-old Paul McCartney comes on the scene. He meets John Lennon on the 6th of July 1957 at the suggestion of Ivan Vaughan at the Wootton Village Hall, where he, of course, impresses John with his rendition of 20 Flight Rock. And you know, it must have been kind of hard for John to hear this younger kid playing and possibly singing the song better than he could. I think we'll forever be grateful that he had the humility to see that Paul McCartney would be a major strength to the Quarrymen. So Paul joins the band as the rhythm guitarist shortly afterwards. Then in February 1958, Paul invites his friend George, then 15, to watch the band. George auditions for John, and impressing him with his playing, but John initially thought that George was too young. After a month's persistence, during a second meeting, again arranged by Paul, George would play Raunchy on the upper deck of a Liverpool bus. It kind of went like this. And as quickly as that, George was in the Quarrymen. It's January 1959 and John's Quarrybank friends leave the group and he begins his studies at the Liverpool College of Arts. The three guitarists then, John, Paul and George, the rhythms in the guitars, billed themselves as Johnny and the Moondogs, and they would play rock and roll wherever they could and also whenever they could find a drummer to fill in. Now John, of course, had his art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe, and he sold one of his paintings and was persuaded to buy a bass guitar with the proceeds. And so he joined the band in January 1960, and it was he that suggested the band change their name to the Beatles as a tribute to Buddy Holly and the Crickets. The Quarrymen were no more. As quickly as that, the name change ended the original band. So the Beatles used that name all the way up till May of 1960, when they then became the Silver Beetles, and that's with an extra E. And they started touring, they did an audition, they backed Johnny Gentle in Scotland and kind of refashioned themselves as the Silver Beetles when they returned to England. By the middle of August 1960, they were simply the Beatles. So once again, a name change, but I think this time destiny was calling. And the name the Beatles stands for something quite unique in history, and I'm not sure that the Quarrymen or the Silver Beetles would have meant so much. But you know, with all the talent they had, they could have called themselves anything. John, Paul, George and Ringo. They'd have been a major success with a little help from their friends. The Silver Beetles then comprised of John Lennon on vocals and guitar, Paul McCartney vocals, guitar and sometimes drums, George Harrison on vocals and guitar, Stuart Sutcliffe on bass guitar, an often forgotten member of the Beatles, not just the Silver Beetles, but the Beatles. He was their bassist for 15 months in Liverpool and then in Hamburg. So yeah, going out as the Beatles, and he was their bass guitarist. We've got Tommy Moore, played drums. We've got Johnny Hutchinson played drums for the one audition. Norman Chapman played drums, albeit 3 weeks. And the not to be forgotten Ronnie the Ted. He drummed one gig during the July a time of the Silver Beetles. I couldn't find a lot of information about Ronnie the Ted, so drop me a comment if you find lots of gossip on him. So during May to July 1960, the Silver Beetles performed 28 performances, and during this period, John and Stuart were 19, George and Paul were 17, and Tommy was 28. So as the Silver Beats, they played 3 gigs in May, and then as the Johnny Gentle Band, they played 7 gigs in Scotland, and then returning back to England as the Silver Beetles, they played 18 gigs. Although I think on 2 or 3 of those gigs they billed themselves as the Beatles. Now they secured a short residency at the Grosvenor Ballroom, and they played there as well as a few of the other locations during this period. And it was during this time that the list of drummers would change. So you get Tommy Moore quitting the band, Ronnie the Ted plays for 1 gig, Norman Chapman joins the band for a short spell, 3 weeks I think, then gets conscripted, and of course Paul takes over the drums as well. Okay, let's take a little deeper dive into the Scotland gigs and get a little more detail for you. Prior to Scotland, the 10th of May 1960, Larry Parnes hosts an audition for groups to back the Billy Fury UK tour. He was apparently known in the industry as Parnes Shillings and Pence, little play on pounds, shillings and pence there. And he was kind of the Simon Cowell of his day. And the audition was held at the Blue Angel, and the Beatles were made aware of the event and decided to audition. And they decided they were going to all dress the same in an outfit consisting of black shirt and string shoes, kind of like the black shoes with the stringy bit on the top. And they named themselves the Silver Beats. Now, among the other auditionees was Cass and the Casanova, Derry and the Seniors, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and Cliff Roberts and the Rockers, and of course the Silver Beats. Now, although they hadn't performed together for some months, the Silver Beetles were hopeful on that day, despite the drummer Tommy Moore not showing up. They need a steady drummer, don't they, these lads? So Johnny Hutchinson, who was the drummer for Cass and the Casanovas, he stepped in for the audition. Paul was aware that Stuart would be playing, in another key. So while they were playing, he suggested to Stuart that he face away from the audience during the audition. Now, I'd always thought, or I had it in my head, that Stuart would always turn his back on the audience during the Hamburg years. Years, days, months. But I've read that Stu actually did take on some bass lessons and became more proficient, as time went by. So the audition's over. May the 14th, the group performed their first gig under the name The Silver Beats, and this is at Latham Hall in Liverpool. And this happens because Cliff Roberts and the Rockers, who were booked for Latham Hall, had also been booked for the Casanova Club at the same time. And it was they that suggested that the Silver Beats take the gig. So they take the place at Latham Hall, and this gives the Silver Beats, or the Silver Beetles, their first official performance. So May the 15th, they performed at the Iron Door Club. And this was a lunchtime show featuring the Silver Beetles and Cass and the Casanovas. And it's the only known performance by the band using the name the Silver Beetles to play at that venue. They would go on to play more gigs there, but then they were using the name the Beatles. So although they failed to win the Larry Parnes audition to back Billy Fury, a call did come through from Parnes on the 18th of May, and he invited them to act as the backing band for Johnny Gentle's UK tour. The Silver Beetles began their 7-date tour of Scotland with Johnny Gentle, and the tour featured the band billed as the Johnny Gentle Band instead of the Silver Beetles, as they were calling themselves. But it didn't matter to them because they were excited to be working in show business, and so the Scottish tour began, and the tour would take them from Alloa, near Stirling, up to Inverness, then across to Fraserburgh, back to Keith, then on to Fors and Nairn, before backtracking again to the last gig at Peterhead. I'm not sure why, they kind of went backwards and forwards like that, why they didn't choose a direct route, but it could well have been something to do with the availability of the venues, right? So the first gig is Friday the 20th of May at the Alloa Town Hall. And this is where Johnny Gentle meets the Beatles for the first time, 1 hour before they all went on stage. And they had 20 minutes to rehearse. Gentle gave George a black shirt so that he could match those worn by Paul and John. And as I said, they never billed by the Silver Beetles on this tour. All the posters gave the billing as Johnny Gentle and his group. The lads at this stage decided to adopt some stage names, and Paul is quoted to have said, "Now we were truly professional. We could do something we had been toying with for a long time, which was to change our names to real showbiz names. I became Paul Ramon, which I thought was suitably exotic. I remember the Scottish girls saying, 'Is that his real name? That's great. It's French. Ramon. Ramon. That's how you pronounce it.' Stuart became Stuart de Stall, after the painter. George became Carl Harrison, after Carl Perkins. John was Long John, and people have since said, John didn't change his name. That was very suave. Let me tell you, he was Long John." So the first night gig was apparently rough and ragged, but they improved over the following 6 days. And the Beatles would later say that it was an important tour because it helped them get to a certain level. It was the first time that they'd played in front of a crowd, because before that, all they were pretty much doing was playing school dances in Liverpool. Now, there is a plaque that was unveiled on the town hall in March 2022, after Malcolm Robinson and Robert Ferguson lobbied the local council to have it installed. So, yet another Beatles landmark, and a town laying claim to the lads. These are Beatles. Get your own Beatles. Saturday the 21st, they travelled 150 miles north to Inverness, to the Northern Meeting Ballroom, which is now called the Rendezvous Cafe. The group were on a bill which also featured Ronnie Watt and the Checkers Rock Dance Band, and it was advertised as the Beat Ballad Show, and lasted from 7:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. and admission was 3 shillings before 8 p.m, which is £3.86 in today's money, and 5 shillings after 8 p.m, which is £6.40 in today's money. Now, in the hotel after the show, Gentle worked on a song he was writing called "I've Just Fallen for Someone," and John would help out with the middle eight, contributing 4 lines. "We know we'll get by, just wait and see, just like the song tells us, the best things in life are free." Money. The song was later recorded by Gentle under the name Darren Young, and it was released as a B-side to the single "My Tears Will Turn to Laughter." Now, it was released on the Parlaphone label in August 1962, but the song did not include a credit to Lennon. And it failed to chart because it sold around 3,000 copies.
Just wait and see, just like the song tells us, the best things in life are...
So Sunday the 22nd they had the day off, and then on Monday the 23rd they played the Dalrymple Hall in Fraserburgh. Now, on the journey, the driver, Jerry Scott, asked Gentle to take the wheel, and he crashed the small van into another car, and Tommy Moore suffered concussion and some loosened teeth. And while Tommy was being treated in hospital, John and the promoter from the Dalrymple Hall arrived at the hospital and kind of carted Tommy off to the venue. So the heavily sedated Tommy's playing, the gig, despite having little kind of idea where he is. Hang on a minute, you're playing Rock Around the Clock. We're supposed to be doing an Elvis song. As the tour progressed, Gentle gave the Silver Beetles a slot in his show, so they got to play for 20 minutes before then being joined by Johnny Gentle on stage. And Paul would later say, "We did okay on that tour, playing church halls all over Scotland, like Fraserburgh. It was great. We felt very professional, but we were endlessly on the phone to Larry Parnes' office complaining that the money hadn't arrived. Years later, I said this on a radio programme, and Larry threatened to sue me because his aunties had got on to him. Larry, you didn't pay those nice Beatle boys. That was a true shame in his book. So Tuesday the 24th, they have another day off, which gave Tommy a chance to recover from his accident. And then on Wednesday the 25th, they play the St Thomas Hall, Keith. So Thursday, May the 26th, they played the Town Hall in Fours. Now by this point, the group had run out of money, desperately calling Larry Parnes' office on a daily basis. The next morning, they drove off from their hotel, the Royal Station, without paying the bill. And I often wonder, if the hotel bill is still unpaid. If so, an invoice could be sent to MPL Communications Limited. Friday the 27th, it's the band's penultimate show, and this was at the Regal Ballroom in Nairn. And now by this point, the group had barely enough money. And during a call made by Johnny Gentle to Larry Parnes in London, an angry John grabbed the receiver and yelled, "We're skint up here. We haven't got a pot to piss in. We need money, Larry." And Gentle said, "You didn't hold back." And it seemed to work because Alan Williams did send up a few more pounds. So Saturday, May 28th, the Rescue Hall at Peterhead. It's the band's final tour date with Johnny Gentle. So after that, they arrived back in Liverpool on the following date, much poorer than when they'd left, but with some experience of playing on a live tour. And Larry Parnes said, "Johnny Gentle used to phone me virtually every day saying, 'Come up to Scotland and see these boys. I've given them a spot in my act and they're doing better than I am.'" He was very honest. I always said that if I'd found the time to go up to Scotland, he might have been the fifth Beatle. Who knows? The fifth Beatle conundrum. Don't even say anything. Don't even leave a comment. We all know that's a handful. Oh, Elliot Roberts just did a lovely video about the fifth Beatle. Go and watch that. It tears it all and everything. Really concise. There are too many. So the Silver Beetles and Johnny Gentle part way, and they don't see each other again apart from one occasion when the Beatles are performing at the Wirral. And Johnny said, "Shortly after the tour, I visited the boys in Liverpool and watched them doing a gig across the Mersey at the dance hall in Wolsey in the Wirral. When I walked into the hall, John spotted me, announced me to the audience, and invited me up to the stage to sing a song. We ended up doing the whole set we did on the Scottish tour. I had several tours in Scotland after the Beatles tour and requested my manager get me the Beatles for my second tour, but they were already booked to go to Hamburg in Germany. The rest is history." Now on June the 11th, the group arrived at their gig to discover that Tommy had failed to arrive. And they went to his house and found that he'd quit the band to become a forklift driver. They went to the workplace and tried to convince him to return, but he refused. So for that gig, Lennon asked, "Is there anybody in the audience who can stand in?" And apparently this large Teddy boy gang leader named Ronnie the Ted stepped up on the stage and sat behind the drums all night. And apparently he was terrible. So on June the 13th, the group replaced Tommy and Ronnie with Norman Chapman. But after 3 weeks, he entered national service due to being conscripted, so he was out, and that meant Paul would briefly replace him as the drummer. And I'm wondering, did Paul sing while he's drumming? Or just, But their residency was short-lived at the Grosvenor Ballroom because it was forced to abandon all rock and roll events in early August 1960. Because the shows were there, the shows would sometimes spark kind of fights in the crowd, and as a result, the group decided to pull the curtain on the Silver Beetles and start afresh as the Beatles. And that then is a very short and potted history of the Silver Beetles, but it definitely kind of fits in as a segue between, their humble beginnings as the Quarrymen and what they would become. Arguably the most famous and influential pop band in the world, and I'm pretty sure that many groups and artists owe a big thanks, if not debt, to the Beatles, kind of like paving the way. And I'm glad that they had the tenacity to pull and push all the way through those early years, because they had the dream and the vision, and I kind of always liken it to Paul McCartney's comment about, you know, just go for it with a little luck. He wrote that song, didn't he? With a little luck. But that's kind of always been his vibe. You know, if it feels right, go for it, try it, and, you know, something will come out of it. Okay, that's it. Another short video. I wish I could have gone to Scotland, but you know, I had to do it. I had to get it out. So it's helped me fill a couple of gaps, you know, between what was the Quarrymen and what was the Beatles. What kind of happens in the middle there? So we now get the Quarrymen, Johnny and the Moondogs, the Silver Beats, the Beatles, the Silver Beetles, and as well as the Johnny Gentle Band, and then finally the Beatles. So thanks for watching, bearing with, and leave a comment. I appreciate your comments. They're always great. I love the interaction. I will, of course, again say any nastiness and flaming, and your comment doesn't get posted because I vet them all beforehand. And I also block people. I like blocking. It's like, whoa, you're out of here. Oh dear. The YouTube is not open to the world, you know. There's hundreds of millions of users, and, you know, I'm a tiny, tiny little speck in the corner of the YouTube world. It is. It's my little spot, and we've got a nice little community going. And for all those that don't like it, they will give me a dislike. But that's not against me. That's just the YouTube thing saying, oh, I won't show Tudor Smith to anybody else who gives a dislike. Gosh, I could ramble and ramble all day long. But now I need a cup of tea. So, see you in another video.